end of the Cold War saw the emergency of an international order. This shaped globalization as a tool to connect the world in order to allow the countries to integrate themselves better in the global commerce and then to create economic growth, and also allegedly to facilitate the access to knowledge for people. However, there is an important gap between theory and reality. We have been able to observe that globalization hasn't been a reducing factor of inequalities at a global scale. Indeed, we are witnessing the exact opposite: unequal distribution of wealth, unjust, the transfer of sovereignty to the world's biggest economies, transnationals, and even NGOs affecting the nation-state project and promoting the new conflicts, which has been the root's huge migration movements and involvement in illegal activities. In this video, I want to talk especially about three important topics: homogeneized culture, food globalization, and informal work. About homogeneized culture, we live in a world where all the major capitals tend to have the same globalized culture, with more or less similar coffee places, shopping malls, fashion movements, gentrification process of former rural areas, etc. That phenomenon being put into scrutiny, we realize that the main cultural gap now occurs between the big cities and the rural areas, thus finding themselves outside of the globalization. This creates deep resentment from people living in rural areas toward those living in the big cities, in other words, the winners of globalization. For example, that situation leads to the American people electing Donald Trump for president. It is identified that the urban people are less aware of the importance of preserving and caring for natural resources, tending to the squander. In many cases, they feel superior to the people living in the rural areas. For example, people living in urban areas in developing countries tend to want to resemble to those living in developed countries. Parents' preoccupation for their children to learn English, have a degree, have an experience in a foreign country, and even interrelate a consolidated family with an international couple. Of course, with blonde hair, blue eyes, white, that allow the race to improve. And not only the language, race, clothing, but also the food diet, and begins to align with what is imposed globally. From the other hand, today is identified that because of internal conflicts, wave of peasants, indigenous people, have arrived in the city and do not wish to return to the countryside. The above has created a decrease in work on land and that begins to develop and lose the ancestral importance of this resource. Likewise, there are still groups that remain rooted in nature and that in the midst of global dynamics have sought tools to connect the board. In fact, there are various ethnic groups in the region that have transcended broad. It's time to speak about food globalization. Nowadays, it's fashionable to be healthy. For this, the food companies have been in charge of creating different campaigns for the consumption of specific products and in turn, affecting the local gastronomy. Today we talk about organic foods, low-fat, powdered products and boxes. But what happens when these foods affect the sustainability of the planet? What happens to our gastronomic tradition? What do we do when developed countries want to cooperate but imposing their habits? Today, there are several examples in the world where it's reflected that dietary change in a culture can bring major problems. In an indigenous community of Putumayo, Colombia, it was identified that in humanitarian aid they begin to provide milk and meat to the indigenous people. Over time, this generated serious problems in their health, since they are not accustomed to these foods. We have a serious and short-term problem: global warming. It is time not to think about vanity. It is time to think about our planet, to think about the poorest people, and to step forward to the awareness of who we are and what we consume. We must evaluate the work of the farmers, the local commerce, and stop acting as machines of consumption. And the last is about informal work. Amartya Sen calls the informal economy poverty economy. The informal economy is the unofficial economy, the submerged economy. The economy will have different imaginaries globally, varying its rules and operation. Economists say that in the informal economy, greater participation of women and the elderly will be seen. As time passes, informal work is normalized and mixed with formal work. However, this type of work generates uncertainty and lack of future. On the other hand, we will see in our society informal works involved with illicit activities of state advances and societies without future projections. We can build a more equitable society. We can be better human beings. We can be more sensitive to a world that is asking for compassion.